What's up, everybody? Welcome to Stacking the Box College Football Edition. As you can hear, the sirens are going across my apartment as we go live because we do have a special guest for today's show. Cody Williams, who I have spotted a little bit of a lead in our pick segment, has taken some timely vacation. So I, Reed Wallach, am joined by Josh Yourish, contributor on Fanside College Football Saturday Blitz. Josh, appreciate you taking the time. We're calling you in from the bullpen here. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going really well. Happy to join the show.
Yeah, pumped to have you. Again, Cody taking some time off during the middle of the season with a little bit of a lead. Some say it's vacation. I say it's some timely PTO. But no, it's great to have you on. I think this is the first real week, in my opinion, of conference play. You see it across the board. Now, we've seen like some smatterings here and there, but this is where you're seeing about 90% of college football games are going to be conference-related games. And I think it's a really, really good time to take some stock in what we've seen on the field, maybe reassess some expectations for the rest of the season, both good and bad for some teams. So what we're going to do today is go through the Power Four conferences, go through maybe a team that isn't priced as the favorite or the second choice, maybe a dark horse, I guess is the simple word, but maybe someone a little bit further down or even the third choice that might be a little bit better than we had expected earlier this season. So, Josh, if you're ready to get started, we could get right into it.
Yeah, ready to hop into it.
Awesome. So let's start with the best conference in college football, and that's the SEC. We got Georgia, Alabama this weekend, and we're certainly going to talk about that in our pick segment and our marquee matchup. But I think that the SEC is really interesting because a lot of the talent this year, first of all, there's a lot of, I think, the middle has a lot more bad teams than we had thought, but the upper middle, like below the Georgias, actually seem to, in my opinion, be a little bit closer than we had anticipated going into this season. Who's one team, Josh, that you have your eye out on now that conference play is about to really pick up?
To me, there's like a very clear tier of 5 teams in the SEC, and I think any of those 5 can win it when you talk about Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, and then my pick as the dark horse, which I think you're going with as well, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
This is a team that a couple years ago with Hendon Hooker could win a shootout. And it was really exciting when they did win a shootout and beat Alabama. And you felt like, okay, this Josh Heupel offense, this veer and shoot, spread it out with wide splits. This is going to be something in the SEC. But then they weren't ready to play Georgia. They weren't ready in the trenches. This team is in a really impactful way. This is an elite defensive line led by James Pierce Jr. And there's, a bunch of other guys on that defensive line that they rotate in, like a legitimate SEC defensive line should be. And then you have Nico Iamaleava, who's hasn't really broken out yet, but I think will when they need him to, right? They beat Oklahoma 25-15. Those were some garbage time touchdowns. That game was over early. Nico didn't play particularly great, and he's still like 11th in the country in yards per dropback and has a 53.8% success rate on his dropbacks. Like, this offense hasn't totally come together, and it's still one of the best in the country. When you pair that with an elite defensive line, I think you have a team that can win the SEC.
Yeah, I completely agree. Tennessee was going to be my pick as well. Some quick words, not to rehash the entire really well-put analysis. I think what makes Tennessee different this year is, I know Nico may have not had the 350-yard passing game because they haven't needed to because they've been suffocating on defense, but we saw it against Oklahoma in what is still, in my opinion, an elite defense. There was the 60-plus yard touchdown pass on a dime, a frozen rope 30 yards in the pot. I mean, it was an absolute dime. And he also had another pass, Nico, down the sideline that was called back for, I believe it was ineligible man downfield. The explosive plays are more than there for this Tennessee team. They just haven't needed to really show it yet. So I think Nico, I know there's a lot of hype around the Dylan Raiolas of the world. I'm Team Nico here. I think that this is a team that is a force to be reckoned with. And you look at their schedule, they do have some offensive line injuries that are going to be tested. They were down 2 starters, I believe, against Oklahoma. They are on a bye this week. They got to get healthy because Alabama in about 3 weeks and then Georgia in November. Those are the 2 games that will probably define the ceiling of this team. I would like Tennessee in the game against Alabama. We'll see about the Georgia game. My fingers are crossed certainly for Tennessee. My team though, Ole Miss. I think we knew that this team had a high floor with the talent on hand with Jackson Dart and Lane Kiffin, but this team is showing against an easy schedule, but a team that I think has no signs of slowing down. We'll see if injuries play a role in this team because I think the depth could be a question, but this is a roster that Lane Kiffin's constructed through the transfer portal and has as much high-end talent, I think, as pretty much any team in the SEC. I think this, between Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, they finally got Juice Wells healthy. The defense has been devastating. They play Kentucky this weekend. I think that they could absolutely light them up. And you go through their schedule, there's not that many tests. If you really,
they got a really good draw.
They got a good draw. The team seems to have a higher ceiling than I think maybe some had anticipated. And they get Georgia at home, who, if Georgia's maybe a little bit closer to the pack than it has been in the past few years, all of a sudden, this is an Ole Miss team that isn't just a playoff contender. It's a surefire playoff contender and maybe even a threat to get a top 4 seed and a bye. So maybe this is the year that Lane really puts this all together with Dart, who is most certainly in the Heisman conversation, the leading passer so far through 4 weeks. Before we go on, still Kurt, and we see the question about Travis Hunter. We'll bring Hunter's Heisman odds up during the Big 12 segment. First, though, let's talk some Big 10 football.
Yep.
A conference that also is in the midst of realignment. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA all come in. We've seen USC get their welcome to the Big 10 moment last week in a loss to Michigan. Where do you think, like, do you want to talk about USC? Do you want to talk maybe about another team that's maybe rising up the ranks? Nebraska, Illinois was pretty consequential game last Friday night that Illinois won on the road. Where do you want to take this one as maybe a Big 10 dark horse?
So it's not so much a dark horse. I just feel like the interesting conversation is in the Big 10 is, can Penn State be for real? Can Penn State actually compete with an Ohio State? And I'm not certain that this team can, but it's worth looking into how different this version of Penn State is compared to last year's version. They bring in Andy Kotelnicki, obviously from Kansas, as the offensive coordinator. And right now, the offensive numbers just like aren't real, both in the sense that they're off the charts good from an explosiveness rate, from success rate. And they're also not real because they played Kent State last week and put up 718 yards, and that just doesn't really count. We saw that with Tennessee beating Kent State 71-0. On the defensive side, I have concerns, though, and I don't know, especially if Kevin Winston Jr., their star safety, is going to be out, and it seems like it's a muddy situation, but it seems like he's going to be out for a significant stretch. I don't know that that secondary is going to be good enough to keep up with all of the playmakers, the Jeremiah Smiths, the Emeka Ibukas on Ohio State's roster. But I think Penn State's closer than they've been before. I'm interested in what your opinion is on that group, because I know you tweeted over the weekend, Jalen Daniels was an Andy Kotelnicki merchant. And I replied, I was like, I'm terrified of what that makes Drew Aller. What have you seen from the Nittany Lions?
I think Penn State has completely flipped the script from being a defensive-minded club to, I think, a pretty potent offense, especially in the Big Ten. I think that this offense can compete at the highest level. You mentioned the Winston injury to the secondary. I think that could be a concern with some of the teams on Penn State's schedule as the schedule continues. So thinking like a road game at USC later this season, Illinois, who is 12th in EPA per pass so far this season. This weekend, we're going to talk about that game during the pick segment. I think Penn State's college football playoff ceiling, I think the offense can go when they play maybe an SEC opponent. Maybe that's where we see the athletes that Penn State doesn't really have a wide receiver. Maybe that's where it shows up. But I think Drew Aller's taken some strides. And I think if he can start to hit that outside pass, the deep out 15 yards, the long throw across the sideline. That's what I think Aller lacks. But I mean, there's no denying this guy is an absolute cannon for an arm. So I do think Penn State has upside. Can they win the Big Ten? Yes, I say cautiously optimistically. I do think that they have the talent to compete. Will it come together in a big game? we're still waiting for James Franklin to put that together for a full season. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
To
you talked
me,
about their lack of athletes. You mentioned USC. Like, that's a team that does have the athletes, but we saw last week that they don't have the guys in the trenches to, beat a service academy version of Michigan.
yes. I think Penn State, I would say that they're fairly complete, but I do wonder if this team is starting to change its identity on the fly almost. Not on the fly, but relative to past
In one
years.
offseason, it was a pretty big shift to what we're looking at now. Yeah.
So that's where I wonder if the college football playoff ceiling, how high that really goes. Is it they win a game? Is it they win a few games? I think it's super, super interesting. For me, Indiana, I'm not going to say they're going to win the Big Ten or anything like that, but this is a team that I was very high on going into the season, and they have passed with flying colors, granted against a fairly soft schedule so far, but this team was being thought of as in the basement of the Big Ten, thought of as like Purdue. This team is a tough out, both offensively and defensively, and they can, if a few breaks go their way, this is a team that maybe in early November could be at least like a win and another team's loss away from leapfrogging into the Big Ten championship game. If some chaos scenarios goes, this team had a win total of 5.5. I think the win total, this team is going to be flirting with like 8 wins, 9 wins, maybe even. So Kurt Cignetti has quickly made a stamp on this team's upside. I quickly made a stamp on this team's outlook. Pretty much a G5 all-star team. And I think this team deserves a lot of credit. And if you look at the Big Ten, you have your elite teams. You have your Ohio State, your Oregons. You could throw Penn State in there. Indiana could beat Michigan. Indiana could beat pretty much almost anybody on their schedule. So the Hoosiers, I think, are a team that can't be slept on in the Big Ten. Maybe not to win the conference, but on a week-to-week basis, an interesting team to keep an eye on.
And they have a nice runway, too, if you look at their schedule. That's what I thought was going to break really well for Nebraska. And then they lost to Illinois because they had a soft schedule before a meeting with Ohio State and Columbus, and maybe they'll make up some ground after losing last week. But if you look at it, up next is Maryland, at Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, at Michigan State, and then November 9th versus Michigan for Indiana. They could win every one of those games until they're playing Michigan. And then you're looking at an undefeated Indiana team that's probably in the top 15, maybe even the top 10, 12 conversation playing Michigan. That's going to be something we didn't expect to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk some Big 12, let's bring up Still Curtin's podcast question about Travis Hunter winning the Heisman. We'll talk Colorado because, Josh, I don't know about you. I would not bring up Colorado in this Big 12 dark horse conversation. On the topic of Travis Hunter, I think it's more likely that Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders shut it down for the rest of the season at some point, rather than Travis Hunter is a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. The guy is an unbelievable talent. He's a top 5 prospect in the NFL draft. He plays both sides. I think this Colorado team is bad, though, outside of like 5 players on their roster, and the losses are going to start building up, and they're going to say, what's the point? Let's just go get ready for the NFL draft. So, the Heisman, I know it's supposed to go to the best player, but if your team is 5-7, 6-6, I don't see it outweighing some of the stud quarterbacks at the top level. How do you see it, Josh?
I wrote about this back in the first week of the season when Travis Hunter had that incredible game against North Dakota State. And I forget the exact numbers, but basically you don't win the Heisman if your team wins fewer than 9 games. The only Heisman winner ever on a losing team was Paul Hornung for Notre Dame, and I think that was in like the 50s.
You don't remember Paul Hornung's Heisman campaign? That was
I was
a media blitz.
No, that one was a bit before my time. It just doesn't happen. He is the best player in the country, like you said, but it just doesn't happen. And I think as we get further into the season with more marquee matchups, right, like our eyes can go to Baylor, Colorado, when Tennessee and Oklahoma is starting out sloppy and it's kind of a blowout. And when, Michigan USC was a good game, but We don't think those are national championship contenders. So our eyes can go to Boulder and be like, Travis Hunter is incredible. I don't think we're going to have the bandwidth for that when you have Georgia and Alabama playing, when you have these marquee SEC and Big Ten matchups that will actually determine things. And then the eyes are just going to go there and you're going to pick somebody else.
If he was to finish the season and, keep up a nice statistical resume, he will probably get votes, like down ballot votes.
Yeah.
Maybe you see one or two first place votes, but ultimately I think the Colorado show is kind of over with. And the team should have lost to Baylor.
Yeah.
And this team is going to get railroaded by UCF this weekend. So it just, I don't see it. I don't buy into it. He's a great player, but the team just isn't good enough. It's a little not fair, the Heisman campaign, because it doesn't go to the best player, because it does go to arguably the best player on the best team, or the best
quarterback on the best team in most cases,
typically, or a historic season, which Travis Hunter's putting up eye-popping stats, but I wouldn't say it's historic. It's just incredible. So I think
it's also hard to contextualize it, right? Because you're talking about like Champ Bailey's the last one that's done a two-way thing like this. So
Charles Woodson won the Heisman doing it, but that team was a national championship contender.
Yeah, exactly. So there are only so many examples of like a two-way guy. So I think it's hard to actually properly contextualize how incredible it is statistically compared to like, Devontae Smith put up this insane receiver season. We've seen a lot of receiver seasons. That's one of the best. Okay, he gets the Heisman.
Yeah, absolutely. And Frankie Russell pops in the chat and talks about we should bring up Duke undefeated Blue Devils when we get to ACC. We will bring that up. But first, we're going to talk some Big 12, a conference that at least I thought, Josh, going into the season was going to be wide open. I thought it was going to be maybe 8 teams. You could ask 8 different people and they'll give you 8 different teams that could win the Big 12. And we saw the chaos already start in this conference. We had UCF last week rally to beat TCU. We had Utah without Cam Rising go to Stillwater and handle Oklahoma State. We saw Kansas State smoke Arizona, then get smoked by BYU because they couldn't hold on to the football in Provo. How do you see the Big 12? I think you could still ask 8 different people and get 8 different teams. So I'm curious where you're going to take this one.
I see the Big 12 as Utah's conference to lose. Like, I still think it's wide open, but I think Utah showed that they're clearly the best team in the conference. Doing that with a true freshman quarterback, going to Stillwater, and for most of the game, they bullied Oklahoma State. So I had been coming into the year picking Kansas State because I won't say fell for because Avery Johnson's been good outside of the BYU game. But I was all in on that, and it turned up not so good when they went out to Provo. If we're talking about dark horse, like, it's kind of cheating because they're actually second in the odds right now. But I think we have to talk seriously about UCF maybe winning this conference, which is not something I expected. I expected a step forward from this team, but this running game is, I mentioned Michigan looking like a service academy. This run game is like service academy good. There are problems on the defense. Like, they're allowing a 48.6% passing success rate, which is in the 7th percentile of college football. Not very good. It doesn't help when you face TCU and Josh Hoover goes crazy. But I think there's a path with KJ Jefferson, with Penny Boone, with RJ Harvey in this backfield of Gus Malzahn's team just running over and bulldozing everybody in the Big 12.
Yeah, UCF was going to be my mention with their offense. And also, the schedule breaks pretty nicely for them. Don't sleep on that. Last week of the season, getting Utah, I believe on a short week at home. That's a pretty tricky travel spot for the Utes. So I went like way down the board because I do think that this conference could get crazy. So Arizona State lost to Texas Tech last week in a game that they arguably could have won. They had a post-game win expectancy of like 75%. So bit of a bad result there. They fell behind early and it seemed like they just couldn't really get out of their own way. Tough road game. They have some tricky games, but if you go through their schedule, there is some blow-up potential with a lot of the teams in their way. First, they host Utah on a short week at home, of course. They do go to Oklahoma State. What if Oklahoma State is a different team than we had expected going into the season? It seems like they're on a tricky path. They do go to Kansas State, but they also host UCF, upstart BYU, and then go to Arizona to close the season, who I think things could get a little hairy there as well with a new coach and some maybe guys thinking about the pro ranks. It's a lot to say that this is a long shot. They are 100-1 to win the conference. I'm not even saying this is worth a bet. I'm just saying Arizona State has been very impressive this season. They have a very good coach. They have a sound running game and a pretty sturdy defense at that. They've they've contained two explosive offenses already in Texas State and Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech getting to 30-something points is a little smoke and mirrors, a few short fields there. So it's a lot to say again. I think Arizona State is much improved, and I think that they can still be heard from in the Big 12 title race in a conference that I think is going to have a lot of coin flip scenarios, a lot of variance. I think they're 100-1. It's crazy, but I think this team is much improved.
Yeah, and to watch Scatterbo play in important games would be awesome because that physical running game is like something different and very enjoyable. I enjoy watching Arizona State. As you said, it's an extreme long shot, but it's the Big 12 and Utah, who I said is the favorite, and I think it's their conference to lose. They're starting Zach Wilson's little brother as a true freshman.
And you never know when Rising's going to get hurt.
Yeah, exactly. That's far from a sure thing.
Yeah. Let's talk some ACC. We'll start by answering Frankie's question about Duke. I'll go first. Frankie, I'm sorry. I don't see it with Duke at all. Even if they beat UNC, I think Malik Murphy. I mean, listen, shout out to him for transferring to Duke. If he gets a degree from Duke, that's very, you could really go places with that. But I don't see it at all from Duke. This is a team that probably should have lost to Northwestern, arguably should have lost to UConn. I'm just not impressed with this offense. I don't think it's good. I think the defense hasn't been really tested all that much, and we'll see. The ACC is pretty bad, but I can't get there with Duke. I think Duke, lucky to be 4-0 to start the season.
Yeah, exactly. You said everything there. I don't think there's much reason to believe from watching what we saw from Malik Murphy against Northwestern. It's just impossible to believe this team can actually win the conference.
Okay, so then who is your dark horse ACC team?
It feels gross, but it's the ACC. This is so clearly a two-team league between Miami and Clemson, in my opinion. I went with Pitt because Eli Holstein is interesting and Desmond Reed is a really dynamic running back. And you can see the stuff behind me. I'm not a Pitt fan. All the Pittsburgh stuff behind me might seem misleading. I'm not a Pitt fan. I don't really think Pat Narduzzi is that great of a coach. I think he's like a floor raiser, not a ceiling raiser for your program. But I've been very impressed with Holstein to the point that okay, we kind of have to take notice of this redshirt freshman quarterback who transferred from Alabama and looks the part. I think he has 12 touchdowns and 2 interceptions at this point, and that offense has been pretty explosive. So I'll go Pitt reluctantly.
So I think there's too much dirt on the North Carolina State grave. Win the ACC, maybe not. But I do think this move to CJ Bailey has some upside here where I could see NC State turning their season around, similar to how it did last year, where it finished the season, I believe, winning 6 of 7 to close the year. You look at the schedule, and you can make a pretty good case that North Carolina State is going to be favored in every single game the rest of the season. I mean, if you take care of business, all of a sudden you're going to be in the ACC race. You've only lost one game in the ACC. So yeah. I'll bring it up really quick, but this is a team first of all, they got blitzed by Clemson to start. True freshman road environment. I
thought he looked good.
Yeah, I don't think that you should you can't say, oh, well, NC State's dead. If that's the case and they were dead before, then that's totally fine. I could get with you there. But just because they let up 50 plus to Clemson, sure, it's a dismal effort, but true freshman first start on the road in Death Valley. Stronger men than CJ Bailey will fail in that scenario. So I don't think that it's that bad. You go through their schedule. They host Northern Illinois this week. I think, again, they did beat Notre Dame. So maybe the wheels are falling off. But after that, they host Wake Forest, they host Syracuse, they go to Cal, bye week, host Stanford, host Duke, at Georgia Tech, and then at UNC. It's not a murderer's row of a schedule. It's
No.
not. And what if Clemson or Miami drops one, drops two? I think the ACC is pretty bad, but these teams, especially at the top, are not without faults in the coaching staff, in an injury away from being far worse. You never know with these things. So I do think that NC State, look, maybe this team isn't winning the conference. I'm being a little out there with my bold predictions here, my dark horses, but I think that this could be the buy low scenario in the ACC where teams are being written off left and right. Maybe wait on NC State, because if you do think about it, while they did struggle to beat Western Carolina and Louisiana Tech, they got blitzed by two likely playoff teams, which okay, we're not talking playoff, we're talking conference, and the conference is pretty bad. So, I don't see any Clemsons and Tennessees on their schedule anymore.
Yeah, I was impressed by Bailey, and I've never been a huge Grayson McCall guy, so I was interested to see what things look like after that, because they have weapons on this offense, and I trust them to figure out. I trust that coaching staff to figure out a defense. I don't know what's happening with Clemson right now, because I've never been a Cade Klubnik guy, and it just looks completely different. So I might have to be a Cade Klubnik guy now. I think that Clemson team, and obviously we think Tennessee could win the SEC. I think those are two playoff teams. So I agree with your buy low.
Yeah. So great stuff there, talking some dark horses. Before we get to our pick segment, it's the greatest time of year. Again, football's back, and it's here to stay until February. Over 1 million fans across 33 states got in the game last year by making picks on Underdog, and you can get started with Underdog today using the promo code STACKINTHEBOX. I love Underdog. It is a sleek app, great for their pick'em pools and their lineups. I like Underdog. Again, super sleek. I use it. I use the promo code STACKINGTHEBOX to get started. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward, and signing up is even easier. All you got to do is head over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com. And again, sign up with the promo code STACKINGTHEBOX, the name of this fine program. And Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy. And again, promo code is STACKINGTHEBOX, one word. To claim your new customer special of a free pick in your deposit offer, you must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783, or text next-step to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. All right, Josh. So I'm off a pretty good week here. Cody also had a solid week. He's still ahead of me. He's 13-10 on the year. I'm 9-14 on the year. It was, I don't know if you've heard, but I beat Cody last year in the pick'em pool. So I've spotted him a few wins. How gracious of me.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, so we'll see how I do this week. Depending on how it goes, we may have to find a way to factor this into the pool. But we got 5 picks here. We're going to talk 3 of the biggest games on the card, and then we're going to still do our Underdog and SICKOS pick. Shout out to me and Cody, though. We both hit our Underdog picks last week. I had BYU outright against Kansas State, and Cody hit Arkansas against Auburn. So, Josh, you're stepping into some big shoes. I think me and Cody, me and Cody, we've been 2-2, 4-2. I'm scrolling back on the picks here. 5-3. 5-3 to start the year on just money line picks alone. Some of them, some fairly big ones too. So pretty happy with how those are going. So Josh, no pressure here on the Underdog picks. So let's start obviously with the biggest game of the weekend. It's going to be Alabama, Georgia. It's no longer a CFP eliminator with the new playoff expansion, but this is going to set the tone probably for the rest of the season. So Josh, I'll give you first word. What are you looking for? What's your best bet? Alabama, Georgia, Saturday night in Tuscaloosa.
I've been in on this Georgia team. I've thought that it's a better roster than Texas. I'm very in on Carson Beck. And there are just too many injuries that have piled up on both sides of the ball. I mean, obviously, we'll have to get the injury report tomorrow when it comes to Georgia. But I'm going to take Alabama plus the points as a home underdog for the first time since 2007, Nick Saban's first year. Like, it is still Alabama. I think I've liked a lot of what DeBoer has done with Jalen Milroe. I don't think Jalen Milroe is like an NFL prospect. I think he's an incredibly useful college quarterback because of what he can do on the ground and how he can throw the deep ball. Now they have some receivers that he trusts. I think Mike Bobo, Georgia's offensive coordinator, way too conservative and has been. I wrote about this last week. He's been way too conservative this season, trying to rely on like the old run game, early screens. We have more talent than you offense that Georgia used to be able to run. And you mentioned there not being like the same level of a gap from Georgia to maybe everybody else in the SEC. That's something Kirby Smart talked about all offseason. He calls it the deterioration of college football. And he says, you know, our backups used to be maybe some of the best players in the SEC. Now they're on Kentucky's roster. Now they're on South Carolina's roster. Like, these guys are finding other opportunities. We even saw that with Alabama when some of their tackles were injured and Caden Proctor was out against USF. They had to reinsert an injured offensive tackle into that game to get their offense to function at all. And then you look at the injuries on Georgia's defensive line. Mykel Williams may not play. Warren Brinson has been banged up, may not play. Jordan Hall, if he does play, it'll be his first action of the year. Xavier McLeod, not sure with an oblique thing, but those are four guys that were going to be important pieces of this defensive line. Mykel Williams, somebody who was maybe going to be like a top 5 NFL draft pick and maybe still will be. I don't think Georgia has the depth up front and in the trenches to match what Alabama can do disrupting Carson Beck. And then on Georgia's offensive line, Tate Ratledge is their best offensive lineman. He's going to be out until maybe they play Florida in the first weekend of November. I like this Georgia team. I like Carson Beck a lot, but I'm betting Alabama because these injuries, I don't think you can overcome injuries the same way that you used to be able to in college football.
I think all great points, 100%. I don't know. I think there's so many questions in this game for teams that have national championship aspirations. I've honestly gone both ways on like how I see it, both side and total. I ultimately landed on the over in the game. Ultimately, I think the biggest questions in this game come down to both secondaries against both quarterbacks. And with a total this low, and I kind of need to depart myself from like how I project the game, because like to me, like two big plays, and this game's like going over the total.
Yeah.
You know, two big shots. I mean, it's low enough where, you know, the game script goes out of whack, even like a short field for one of these teams that they could cash in on. It's just so low that I do think the game might be conservative and might start slow, but Jalen Milroe hits Ryan Williams on one touchdown pass. All of a sudden, Georgia kicks it into high gear and tests like what I think is an untested and potentially an Achilles heel in the Bama secondary. They lost a lot of pros on that. It's a lot of freshmen over there. They've been lucky so far that they haven't faced a high-level passing offense. I think if Georgia comes out of this bye week and lets Beck cook a little bit, maybe this looks a little bit different, and Georgia kind of looks like, I don't want to say Death Star-ish on offense, but they really show that high-octane ceiling, because like to me, Carson Beck is the best quarterback in college football, like projecting to the pros. So if they let him go, because I go back to Kentucky, 15 to 24, 160 yards. Against Clemson, where Georgia, they leaned on the pass game more because they didn't have any running backs really available. 23 to 33, 278 yards against what I think you could argue is a better defense in Clemson, top to bottom.
Yeah, but in that game against Clemson, they only had 6 points in the first half. Like I think you can get away with that against Clemson. I don't know that you can get away with like this Mike Bobo conservative let's protect our Carson Beck, our 5th-year senior quarterback who could be the number 1 pick in the draft. I don't know why they protect him the way that they do. And I don't know. I agree they opened things up and looked way better. If they start the game playing the way they did in the Clemson second half, then I totally agree with you because I don't trust the Alabama secondary either.
I think there's something to be said for playing at Kentucky, who clearly doesn't have the next gear on offense.
Mhm.
And the game plan may have dictated that, hey, we're going to just like try and get out of here with a win, even though it looked much uglier. I wonder if, I mean, you look at Georgia's schedule, they have a handful of really tough games this year, a very tough schedule. Is the team pacing itself for, okay, here's the game where we need to really empty the tank and we really need to go for it? You mentioned some of the injuries. It does sound like Michael Williams on the defensive side is going to play. Tate, the offensive lineman, he's not going to go.
Yeah.
I imagine he had the tightrope surgery, so I imagine he's going to be out just a little bit longer. But I agree. I kind of lean towards the Georgia side. I think I'm going to be on the sidelines for this one. Ultimately, I think over is where I got there. I remember the SEC title game.
Mm-hmm.
I went under in that game and it got over because there were some late scores there. And maybe that's where this game goes again, low scoring for most of it. And then a few late scores kind of push this over the total when the game script kind of dictates more pushing down the field. So I went over there, but I think a super interesting matchup and like a really, really impactful game, not just for like the macro of the season, but also like to learn more about these two teams that I think have maybe a few more questions than you would think for an Alabama Georgia team.
Yeah. I mean, not to stay on this game for too long, but you mentioned like the Alabama secondary and that's kind of the weakness. Is there a Georgia receiver you believe in? Because I'm not sure I have one that I trust to like actually beat Alabama down the field.
Yeah, I think Lovett. Dylan Bell. I think.
If somebody's the guy, it's Dylan Bell.
And I wonder if they dust off Yourish, the Stanford transfer, because I think he's super talented, and he hasn't really been used this season.
No, they got to take him out of the garage. If they are planning to do that, this is the week to do it. So maybe, like you said, they're ready to fire on all cylinders.
Yeah, especially off a bye week. So we'll see. The other impactful game, which I don't want to say it's a college football eliminator for the playoffs, but kind of feels like it, especially in Notre Dame's case, because it seems like with that loss in Northern Illinois, Notre Dame needs to, at the very least, run the table to get in. Another loss is probably it for them. Louisville enters pretty much with a blank canvas in terms of their resume. With a down ACC, I wonder what they need to do to get in. It would get off to a good start by winning in South Bend, that's for sure. Louisville goes there, a 6-point underdog, total of 48. Josh, how do you see this one?
I love Jeff Brom offenses. I think he's one of the best play callers in college football, especially that he's not running, say, a Tennessee veer and shoot, right? Like one of these things that doesn't work in pro football. I think it's a versatile passing game, and Tyler Shuff has looked great in it. But against Notre Dame, that's not quite as easy. So I'm taking the under. I don't see Louisville being able to move the ball on the ground. They haven't been able to. They weren't able to against Georgia Tech. I like this Louisville team. I still have a lot of questions about Riley Leonard. It was a little bit of I didn't want to play a side, so I'll take the under because I like Notre Dame's defense that much.
Yeah, I joined you as well in the under. I kind of lean towards Louisville in this game. This is the prime Jeff Brom underdog spot.
Yeah,
when he gets the team up, and they beat Notre Dame last year. Pretty like blitzed them. It was a really, really tough spot for Notre Dame. But I know revenge angle and all that, but is this Notre Dame offense like getting points here? They're going to run this up. I know they blitzed Purdue, but Oregon State just blitzed Purdue. So yeah. I don't know if, this Notre Dame offense is some wagon. And Louisville, I think you can make an argument Georgia Tech's offense has more explosiveness than Notre Dame's and probably a higher offensive floor. Yeah. Notre Dame, Riley Leonard still has a bum shoulder, and they don't seem to be taking shots down the field. Louisville is a top 25 pass rush grade in terms of PFF's grading. And you also factor in that Notre Dame's down 3 starters on the offensive line for the season.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure that we're going to see everything open up in this game. You make a great point about Notre Dame's defense, probably the best unit on the field. I think we could agree there.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't this game going to be 24-20, 24-17, something like that? Like, I think Notre Dame is destined to play in these NFL style games with like the totals in the low 40s and stuff. So I like the under as well. You also think about the spot for Notre Dame. I mentioned the injuries compiling, not just for Riley Leonard, the offensive line. Go through their season so far. Texas A&M, clearly a draining game.
Yeah.
The loss to Northern Illinois, the bounce back against Purdue, another slogging effort against Miami of Ohio. Now you get Louisville, who isn't your toughest opponent. A&M is probably better than them still straight up. But okay, so you play another high-end opponent. Louisville, meanwhile, FCS Austin Peay, Jacksonville State, a bye week, and then Georgia Tech, who I don't think they deserve to cover in that game. Different story for a different day, but it's still a talented roster. Louisville comes in this game fresh, and they might get wide receiver Colin Lacey back.
Yeah.
If there is a team that can open this one up, it's the Louisville offense. I think Louisville could hit some explosive plays. I think they're personally live for an upset, but I think the under is more prudent play because I do have some questions if Tyler Shuck is ready to go on the road to South Bend.
I think you're actually talking me into the Louisville side because if this is going to be a close game, we both heaped praise on Jeff Brom. We're definitely not talking about Marcus Freeman the same way. So if you want to talk about like the sidelines and who's going to have an advantage there, I'd lean Louisville. I'd lean Louisville's pass catchers, especially if Lacey's back because he was great at South Alabama last year. And Ja'Cory Brooks looked really good last week. And Brom does this, right? Like he found Jamari Thrash last year and he silos his best guy targets and it creates a really explosive, impactful offense. I think he's got a better quarterback than he did last year in Plummer. We didn't talk about Louisville in the ACC dark horse situation, maybe because they are kind of near that upper echelon. But if they win this game, then we have to start talking about them in a different way because I agree that offense could be something really good. And maybe it is the type of offense that can beat Notre Dame down the field.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about your Penn State Nittany Lions taking on undefeated Illinois. James Franklin clamoring for another whiteout. Relax. You only get one of those. You can't ruin the luster of the great whiteout.
I hate that. I hate that. Like I don't understand. You can't just play the whiteout card every night game you have.
Then it's not a whiteout anymore. It's just like we're having a home game at night. You know, it loses its prestige.
Yeah.
But Penn State's a huge favorite here. Laying 17 and a half, sorry. And the total's 47 and a half. How do you see this one?
I mean, we talked about Penn State's offense, right? And it's super explosive. I want to see it against a better team because I don't think West Virginia is very good. That's kind of played out with losses to Pitt and they just beat Kansas, but I don't think that's a very good West Virginia team. And then the defense. I mentioned my concerns about the defense with Winston out. Winston's out. That moves Jalen Reed out from his nickel position where he's best around the line of scrimmage, affecting things. And then he's probably back at safety. Or if you want to keep him there, you have a true freshman, Dawan Lane, moving into that safety spot. Like, I don't know how reliable that is against Luke Altmaier, who has thrown nine touchdowns and no interceptions. He threw 4 interceptions against Penn State last year. He is not the same quarterback that he was for that matchup. I'm taking Illinois with the points. Penn State is in such a weird spot in the Big Ten and has been for a while. They've been so much better than all the like lower tier, mid tier teams, and clearly a step down from Ohio State and Michigan. I think that middle tier is getting a bit closer. I think Illinois is one of those teams, right? They're 29th in pass success rate, and I have questions about the Penn State secondary. I don't like Tom Allen as the defensive coordinator replacement for Manny Diaz. He's not nearly as aggressive. Bowling Green started to dice them up, and maybe that's a good Bowling Green team because they did it to Texas A&M too. But I'm going to take Illinois in the points.
So you made some good points about the Penn State defense and also the Illinois' improvement on offense. A lot of this is Illinois getting a guy like Zachary Franklin from Ole Miss, who fell out of, I guess, like the limelight. That was a high impactful transfer. He just couldn't stay on the field last year. He's on the field now. And this Illinois offense is 12th in EPA per pass. I think there's some questions about the Penn State secondary. You mentioned Bowling Green taking advantage of Winston down at safety. I wonder if Penn State could. It's not a whiteout, but it is a night game on the road, a hostile environment. Maybe you see a little bit of a letdown from Illinois after a gutsy win on the road like that against Nebraska. I do think Illinois can score here, though. I'm concerned about the Illinois defense. I think the defense is probably worse off than the offense, which I think was kind of not the expectation going into the year. Team is 68th in EPA per pass. The defensive line isn't necessarily wreaking havoc in the backfield. So I do think Andy Kotelnicki, who, if you remember, was the OC for Kansas last year, and Kansas carved up Illinois in that game in Kansas last year. He now gets to face that defense again. So an advantageous setup for the Penn State offense. But I do think Illinois can score here. I do think it could put some pressure, especially because we know now Illinois is comfortable passing. They can throw the ball down the field.
Yeah.
And I think if they could hit a few big shots, they can get to 17-ish points, 20 points. So, I mean, look, like to me, Penn State 34, Illinois 17. Let's both go home happy here, Josh. So I'm on the over 47.5. I just think this Penn State team of old was an under team. They're going to suffocate you. They're going to, put a vice script around you and win games 31-0 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is not, I don't see that as the Penn State norm. I think this team is trying to push it into the low 40s with some of their playmakers against some Big Ten teams. But I think the defense isn't as impenetrable as it used to be.
No, I agree about the concerns about the defense. I wonder with this offense, I just want to see it tested. I want to see it in Big Ten play because I'm ready to buy in on this offense is fixed. Kotelnicki is a wizard. Drew Aller's good now. They don't have a lot of receivers, right? Who do you really trust? I mean, Harrison Wallace is okay if he stays healthy. Beyond that, you're looking at Julian Fleming and Omari Evans. Those are not big-time playmakers. And through the first couple weeks, again, the Kent State game just skews all the numbers. So you can't really gain anything out of looking at their offensive statistical profile. Yeah. But they were 99th percentile in explosiveness and 50th percentile in success rate coming before that game. And I'm not exact on those numbers, but just to illustrate the fact that they're hitting these huge shots, I don't know how reliably they're moving the ball without them. And Nick Singleton looks back to his freshman form in the backfield. He's hit a lot of big runs as well. So that's more explosiveness. But his success rate was very low before that Kent State game. I wonder if maybe a team suddenly takes away the home runs. Can you put together a consistent drive against a pretty good defense and not have to rely on a 50-yard bomb?
Kansas 7.4 yards per play last year against Illinois in the 34-23 win. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep.
Upset picks. So me and Cody, without doing this beforehand, one of us has ended up on a small underdog each week, and the other one of us has ended up on a big underdog each week. And you have held to form, Josh. Tell us about you're going a little bit down the board. I've went a little bit more conservative this week after I hit my big one with BYU. So where are you going this week for your upset pick?
I'm taking USF plus 200. There weren't a ton of upsets that I really liked. But this is a team that, if you look at the scoreboard, obviously, I think that's such an overdone thing to say, if you just looked at the box score, you didn't see the story of this game. But if you just looked at the box score, you didn't see the story of USF against Alabama, or in a lot of ways, USF against Miami. They've played really good teams, tough and close, at least for a half or for 3 quarters. I think they're going to be I don't have a lot of numbers on this one. Typically, I want something statistically I can grab onto to make me feel safe. This is more I think USF is a well-coached team. I think Brown's a pretty good quarterback. I think they'll be thrilled to be playing Tulane and not a college football playoff contender. So I think that weight will be lifted a little bit. I think they've played a little bit better against some really stiff competition. So I'll just take USF to win that one outright.
Okay. On the road, early game. Big one for AAC title implications. Both teams openers. I went small here, small underdog. I took FIU against Louisiana Tech. I know FIU just lost to Monmouth in a crazy game. They also fumbled a goal line play in the last minute. They had a post-game win expectancy of like 80%.
Yeah.
Against Monmouth. Meanwhile, Louisiana Tech is putrid. This is the second week in a row where the team has been favored, and I don't believe that's correct. I don't know why La Tech is laying points on the road. FIU, it's a mixed bag this season, but I don't know what we've seen from La Tech to think that this team can go on the road and take care of business against a like-minded opponent. Not to mention, in Louisiana Tech's loss last week to Tulsa, both their starter and backup quarterback went down. They finished the game on their third stringer. As of now, we got co-starter Jack Turner. He was QB1. He is listed as the co-starter, but we'll see we'll see who takes the first snap on Saturday. Turner wasn't healthy last week. Their backup Baker got absolutely crunched in the fourth quarter, and then they go to Evan Bullock, the third stringer, and he couldn't get them over the hill against Tulsa. FIU quarterback Keon Jenkins has looked more comfortable this season. To me, this is just home dog where I think they're probably the better team. So I'm just going to grab the points here. I think they could easily win this game outright. I think La Tech is like really, really bad. Like, why is this team favored on the road? They shouldn't be favored on the road against like probably any FBS opponent outside of New Mexico State and Kent State.
I know we're going to our SICKOS pick next. I'm blown away that you had the third string quarterback for Louisiana Tech just off the dome. So that's real.
I watched the game, so that's how I know that.
No, I know, but that's good. That's impressive SICKO stuff.
Yeah, Louisiana Tech Tulsa was a true SICKOS game. It was so SICKOS that ESPN Plus's like score bug. The play clock, like it was so basic that it was like 0:0 like 30 seconds. Like it wasn't even like
it didn't even get rid of that. Yeah, that's awesome.
It was a disaster. It was like one of those like when you play a high school basketball or like AAU basketball and you like put the scoreboard on the table. It's like one of those things. But yeah, so there's my SICKO / upset pick. But we do move to our SICKOS pick. Josh, I know you're one of the same with myself and Cody in terms of our love of the dregs of college football. I mean, my pick was just FIU money line in the upset pick. So where are you taking us for our SICKOS pick?
It's not so SICKOS because it's a service academy and like there's a little more name recognition there, obviously, right? But I'm taking Army minus 13.5 against Temple. Temple is 124th in rush defense this year. That's not a good recipe. Playing against a service academy that really wants to run the ball, 188th in yards per rush. And when Navy played Temple, they ran for 297 and 138-11. This Army team has looked pretty good so far. So I'll take them to cover a fairly big number against the Owls.
Yeah, I could see that. Kind of like a sneaky over in that game. I think Temple may be able to score a little bit in that one. Okay, for mine, I'm going to go UL Monroe plus 7.5 against Troy. Simply put, why should Troy be laying points to anybody over a touchdown? Low total. It's in the mid 40s here. ULM, the team smoked UAB at home. I know they're going on the road, but what has Troy done this season that's going to instill some confidence that they can win with margin against ULM? They lost outright as a big favorite against Nevada. They weren't able to keep up with Memphis in their game. And I believe it was last week they played an FCS foe. Again, this is more of a fade against Troy than anything. Troy played Florida A&M, and sure, I guess you found your bearings against are they? I think the Panthers. So I'm not sure I really see such an edge here for Troy that they're going to win with margin against a ULM team that plays super slow. I'm not going to talk much about how much talent they have, but again, it's a big spread for a Troy team that I don't think is very good.
And I mentioned teams coming off of like playing against CFP competition and not having to do that anymore. You're getting that with UL Monroe. So I like that pick.
Yeah, great. So Josh, before we get out of here, you want to recap all the picks you gave out?
Yes. Let's start with Alabama plus 2.5. And then we have the under 48 in Louisville and Notre Dame. Illinois and Penn State, I'm taking Illinois plus the 17.5 points. For the upset pick, USF plus 200 against Tulane. And the sicko pick, I'm taking Army to cover 13.5 against Temple.
Yeah, love it. For me, I took the over 48.5 in Alabama, Georgia. I took under 48 in Louisville, Notre Dame, over 47.5 in Penn State, Illinois. And then my upset pick is Florida International, plus 108. Small little dog there. And UL Monroe, plus 7.5 against Troy. Josh, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Great call to the bullpen. You definitely got the save on this one. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Yourish3. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. We'll be back same time next Tuesday. Talk some Alabama, Georgia fallout, get you ready for week 6 and all that and more. Make sure to sign up for Underdog Fantasy using the code Stack in the Box. And until next Tuesday, enjoy the college football week 5.